A billionaire dropped his wallet at a gas station off the highway. $4,300 in cash, every credit card he owned, and a photograph he hadn't shown another living soul in over 30 years. He didn't call. He didn't file a report. He didn't even realize it was gone. But the cashier, making $9.25 an hour, found it behind the snack aisle at 11 o'clock that night. He didn't keep the money. He didn't toss it in the lost and found. He didn't wait for someone to come back. He got in his car and drove 40 miles through the dark to return it. And what happened when that wallet changed hands would unravel a secret, rebuild a broken family, and prove something about human nature that neither of them was prepared to face. 56-year-old Solomon Achebe Whitfield had built a $9.4 billion empire on one principle: everybody has a price. He didn't start rich. That's the part most people never knew. Solomon Achebe Whitfield grew up on the west side of Chicago in a public housing unit with bars on the windows and roaches in the walls. His father came from Lagos with $40 and a work visa. His mother was born in Macon, Georgia, the daughter of a church janitor who never missed a Sunday. They gave Solomon everything they had, which wasn't much, but it was honest. By the time he turned 20, Solomon had clawed his way into a business degree at the University of Chicago on a need-based scholarship and sheer stubbornness. By 23, he'd saved $47,000 working 3 jobs simultaneously: construction during the day, security guard at night, weekend shifts at a warehouse near O'Hare. $47,000, every cent earned by hand. He used that money to start his first real estate venture with his childhood best friend, a guy named Terrence, who'd grown up 2 floors above him in the same housing project. They were going to build something together. 2 kids from the west side who refused to stay there. Terrence vanished 6 months later, took every dollar, emptied the business account, changed his phone number, left Solomon with a maxed-out credit card, a broken lease, and the kind of betrayal that rewires how a man sees the world. Solomon never spoke about it publicly, but privately, he carried it like a scar burned into his chest. And from that day forward, he built his life around one rule, one gospel, one unshakable truth that guided every handshake, every contract, every relationship for the next 31 years. Loyalty is a fairy tale broke people tell themselves to feel better. In the real world, everybody has got a price. You just have not found it yet. And he built an empire to prove it. Whitfield Meridian Capital, commercial real estate, renewable energy, infrastructure development across 14 states, $9.4 billion in total valuation. Solomon sat at the top of it all like a king on a throne made of glass and cold mathematics. His penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan, from 4,200 square feet of polished concrete and floor-to-ceiling windows. He owned 14 vintage cars, each one worth more than most families earned in a decade. His wine collection was appraised at $380,000. He had a private chef, a personal driver, and an assistant who scheduled his life in 15-minute increments. But every night, Solomon ate dinner alone. His calendar was packed. Meetings from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. Phone calls with senators. Negotiations with sovereign wealth funds. Every minute accounted for. Every conversation attached to a dollar sign. Not one personal call. Not one message that didn't involve money. Alone. Again. Always. He had a daughter, Amara, 21 years old, smart, fierce. Her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. She was finishing her junior year at Spelman College in Atlanta, and she hadn't spoken to Solomon in 4 months. Their last phone call still echoed in his skull like a gunshot in an empty room. "You do not trust anyone, Dad, not even the people who love you for free, and I am tired of proving I am not going to betray you." She'd hung up before he could respond. He'd stared at the phone for 11 minutes. Then he put it down and went back to work. Because that's what Solomon Whitfield did. He worked, he built, he controlled, and he never ever let anyone close enough to cost him something he couldn't recover. But on this particular March evening, Solomon was not in his penthouse. He was not in a boardroom. He was not negotiating or strategizing or controlling anything at all. He was driving south on Interstate 57 in a black Mercedes S-Class, alone, heading to Memphis to visit his mother's grave. She'd been gone 11 years. Ovarian cancer took her in 7 months. The fastest and slowest 7 months of Solomon's life. He visited her grave every year on the anniversary. Always drove, never flew, because his mama hated flying. She used to say, "God gave us roads for a reason, baby, so we can think while we travel." And Solomon needed to think. About Amara, about the silence between them, about whether a man could spend 31 years building walls and still find a door back to the people who mattered. The highway stretched dark and empty ahead. March air still carried winter's bite. The dashboard clock read 10:17. He needed gas. The station appeared like a dim lighthouse on the side of the interstate. A small place just south of Champaign, Illinois. Half the neon sign was dead. The parking lot cracked and patched with asphalt that had given up years ago. The smell hit him when he stepped out. Diesel fuel and burnt coffee, and the faint sweetness of something artificial from the air freshener hanging inside the door. Solomon filled the tank, then walked inside. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A floor that hadn't been mopped well enough to hide the stains. A snack aisle with half-empty shelves. A coffee machine that looked like it had been brewing the same pot since morning. Behind the counter stood a young man, thin, mid-20s, wearing a company vest one size too large over a plain white t-shirt. His name tag read Darnell. And on the counter beside the register sat an open textbook, a thick one with a pocket calculator resting on the pages. The young man looked up and smiled. "Evening, sir. Can I help you with anything?" Solomon grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and set it on the counter next to his credit card. He didn't look Darnell in the eye, didn't say hello, didn't acknowledge the greeting. Just swiped his card, took his water, and turned toward the door. "Drive safe, sir," Darnell said to his back. Solomon didn't answer. The door chimed shut behind him. The Mercedes pulled out of the lot and disappeared south into the dark. 15 minutes later, Darnell started closing out the register for his nightly count. He wiped down the counter, restocked the cigarette display, swept behind the coffee station. Then he walked the snack aisle, straightening bags and checking for anything out of place. That's when he saw it. A black leather wallet, sitting on the floor beside the chip rack, must have slipped out of the man's coat when he reached for the water bottle. Darnell picked it up. Heavy, expensive leather. The kind of wallet that cost more than Darnell's entire outfit. He opened it slowly. A driver's license. Illinois. Solomon A. Whitfield. An address in Chicago that Darnell didn't recognize, but could tell was somewhere expensive. 3 credit cards. A black American Express. 2 visas. A business card from a company called Whitfield Meridian Capital. And cash. Darnell counted it twice. $4,300. Crisp hundreds folded neatly held together with a simple silver money clip. His hands went still. $4,300. That was almost 4 months of his life standing behind this counter. 4 months of overnight shifts and burned coffee and textbook pages read between customers. 4 months of trying to keep his mother alive on $9.25 an hour. But there was something else in the wallet. Tucked behind the cash in a small leather pocket most people would miss. A photograph. Old. Faded at the edges. Slightly bent from years of being carried. A woman. Older. Smiling wide. Wearing a pale blue church dress with a corsage pinned to the collar. Behind her, out of focus, a set of wooden pews and stained glass light. On the back in blue ink someone had written 2 words. Mama. Easter, 1994. Darnell stared at the photograph longer than he stared at the money. He closed the wallet. And he stood there behind the counter of a gas station in the middle of Illinois, holding a stranger's fortune in his hands, while the fluorescent lights hummed above him like a question he already knew the answer to. Now, to understand what Darnell did next, you need to understand where he came from. His mother, Ngozi Okafor, arrived in the United States from Lagos, Nigeria in 1997 with a tourist visa, 2 suitcases, and a 3-year-old boy strapped to her chest. She overstayed the visa. She knew the risks. she stayed anyway. Because Lagos had taken her husband to a factory accident, and she refused to let it take her son's future too. For 18 years, Ngozi worked 2 jobs. Days, she cleaned rooms at a Holiday Inn near the interstate. Nights, she washed dishes at a Mexican restaurant on Green Street. She never complained, never called in sick, never once told Darnell that life was hard even when it was breaking her body one shift at a time. She raised him in a 1-bedroom apartment in Champaign that smelled like palm oil and lavender cleaning spray. She made him read every night, checked his homework with a flashlight when the power got cut, walked him to school in rain and snow because the bus route didn't reach their street. Darnell was smart, not the kind of smart that teachers notice right away, but the kind that shows up in test scores and quiet determination. He graduated near the top of his class, got accepted to the University of Illinois with a partial scholarship and a dream that felt so big it scared him. Accounting. He wanted to study accounting, not because he loved numbers, because his mother had been cheated. A tax preparer in town, unlicensed, operating out of a strip mall, had filed Ngozi's returns for 3 years, charged her $800 each time, told her she owed money she didn't owe, filed claims she never authorized. By the time Darnell figured out what happened, his mother had lost $2,800 she could not afford to lose, and the man had closed up shop and moved on to the next town and the next family who didn't know any better. Darnell swore he'd never let that happen to another family like his. He made it through his freshman year. Dean's List. Made it halfway through his sophomore year. Then, one Tuesday morning, his phone rang during a statistics lecture. His mother had collapsed at work. Mini-stroke. By the time Darnell reached the hospital, the doctors had already run tests. Type 2 diabetes. Advanced. Years of skipped meals and double shifts, and no insurance had done what poverty always does. It takes the body first. Darnell dropped out that week. Moved back home. Took the gas station job because it was the only place that would let him work the overnight shift, so he could spend days driving his mother to appointments, picking up her prescriptions, and making sure she ate something besides rice and canned soup. Her insulin cost $340 a month. No insurance. No subsidy, just a number that showed up every 30 days like a debt collector who never slept. Darnell owed $12,000 in hospital bills, paid in monthly installments that ate half his paycheck before he could touch it. His car, a 2004 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it, had a check engine light that had been glowing steady for 9 months. He'd stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar. His apartment cost $625 a month. A studio with a futon for a bed, a hot plate for a kitchen, and a bathroom door that didn't close all the way. But his refrigerator, small as it was, always had his mother's favorite things. Fried plantain chips, bottled Zobo, chin-chin in a Ziploc bag. Because Ngozi came to stay on weekends, and Darnell made sure those weekends felt like home, even when home was barely 400 square feet. He was still studying. That textbook on the counter at the gas station was not decoration. It was the CPA Exam Prep Guide, 3rd edition, bought used from an online seller for $42 because the new one cost $160. Darnell had taken the CPA exam once already. Failed. Not because he didn't know the material, because he couldn't afford the updated study guide, couldn't afford the practice test software, couldn't afford the exam fee twice, and took it anyway on 3 hours of sleep after a double shift because the testing window was closing, and he'd already postponed it once. He would try again. He had to, because the dream hadn't changed. Open a small accounting office, serve the community, help immigrant families file their taxes properly, manage their money, avoid the predators who fed on people like his mother. Not a big dream, not a glamorous one. Just a useful one, just a good one, just the kind of dream that doesn't make headlines but changes lives one family at a time. And now, Darnell stood behind the register at 11:15 on a Tuesday night in March holding a wallet with $4,300 in cash. $4,300. Enough to cover his mother's insulin for an entire year, or pay off a third of his hospital debt, or register for the CPA exam and buy every study resource he needed, or fix the car that might die on him any week now. Nobody would know. There were no cameras aimed at the snack aisle. The owner checked footage once a month, if he checked at all. The man in the Mercedes was already 50 miles south and probably wouldn't remember which gas station he'd stopped at. Darnell could keep the money, and nobody on earth would ever find out. But there was a voice in his head, quiet, steady, speaking in his mother's accent. If you find something that is not yours, you return it. Not because someone is watching, but because God is counting, and your character is the only thing nobody can repossess. Darnell closed the wallet, slid it into his jacket pocket, picked up his phone, and called Terrell, the morning shift guy, asked him to come in early. Then he grabbed his keys, locked the register, and walked out into the cold March night. The Civic started on the second try. The check engine light glowed steady orange. The gas gauge sat just above a quarter tank, and Darnell pulled onto Interstate 57 heading south. 40 miles into the dark. To return a wallet that could have changed his life. The interstate was empty. Just Darnell, the dotted yellow line, and 40 miles of darkness stretching south like a question he hadn't finished answering. The Civic hummed and rattled beneath him. The check engine light glowed its permanent orange. The heater worked, but only on the left side, so his right hand stayed cold on the steering wheel while his left one sweated. The radio drifted between static and a gospel station out of Decatur. A woman's voice singing something about mercy, something about being carried when you cannot walk. Darnell drove with the wallet in his jacket pocket. He could feel it against his chest like a second heartbeat. Heavier than leather, heavier than cash. $4,300. He'd done the math 3 times before he left the station. $340 a month for his mother's insulin. 12 months. That was $4,080. He'd have $220 left over. Enough to register for the CPA exam. Not enough for the study materials, but close. So close it made his teeth ache. Or he could fix the car. The transmission was slipping. The mechanic on 5th Street said it would cost $1,100 to repair and warned him that if he kept driving, the whole thing would seize on the highway someday. No warning. Just a dead car on the shoulder and a tow bill he couldn't pay. Nobody would know. The security camera at the station pointed at the register and the front door. The snack aisle was a blind spot. The owner reviewed footage once a quarter if he remembered. The man in the Mercedes was already miles south and probably had more cash in his glove compartment than most people kept in their savings accounts. He wouldn't miss it. He might not even come back for it. Darnell could keep every dollar and sleep just fine. Except he couldn't, and he knew it. Because somewhere between the counting and the justifying, he'd looked at that photograph again. The woman in the blue church dress, smiling like the whole world made sense on that Easter Sunday in 1994. And he thought about his own mother, sitting in her apartment right now, probably asleep with the television on because the silence scared her. A woman who'd crossed an ocean with nothing and raised a son with everything she had, which was never enough and always more than enough at the same time. If she found out he'd kept another man's money, she wouldn't yell, she wouldn't lecture, she would just look at him. That look, the one that was worse than anger. The quiet disappointment of a woman who'd sacrificed everything so her son could become someone she was proud of, and that look would cost more than $4,300 could ever repay. Behavioral economists have a term for what Darnell was facing. They call it the honesty gap, the distance between what people say they would do and what they actually do when nobody is watching. Research shows that when the value of a found item exceeds 1 week of the finder's income return rates, drop below 20%, Darnell was holding nearly 4 months of his salary in a leather fold. And he was driving in the opposite direction of self-interest. He stopped for gas 20 minutes into the drive, a different station, smaller, self-serve only. He pumped $22 worth of regular unleaded into the Civic and paid inside with cash. A 10, a 5 and 7 ones. Nearly 2.5 hours of standing behind a register selling cigarettes and lottery tickets to strangers. $22 to do the right thing. That was the price of his conscience. And he paid it without flinching. He got back on the interstate, The gospel station had faded to static. He drove in silence. By 11:45, Darnell had checked his phone twice. Google Maps showed 3 hotels within a reasonable distance of the I-57 corridor heading toward Memphis. A Holiday Inn Express, a Comfort Suites, and a Hampton Inn just off exit 217 near Effingham. The Hampton Inn was the closest to the route, the most logical stop for someone driving through. He chose the Hampton Inn, pulled into the parking lot at 12:08 in the morning. The lot was half full. A black Mercedes S-Class sat near the entrance. Darnell's chest tightened. He parked 3 rows back, grabbed the wallet, and walked inside. The lobby was quiet, warm, smelled like carpet cleaner and complimentary cookies. A young woman behind the front desk looked up startled to see someone in a gas station vest walking in after midnight. "Can I help you, sir?" Darnell held up the wallet. "I found this. It belongs to one of your guests. Solomon Whitfield. I saw the ID. I just need to return it to him." The woman glanced at the wallet, then at Darnell, then at her computer screen. She hesitated. "I am sorry, sir. I cannot give out guest information." Hotel policy. Darnell's heart sank. He stood there for a moment, wallet in hand, 40 miles from home, running on no sleep, and $22 less than he'd started with. The logical thing was to leave the wallet at the desk and go. But something kept his feet planted. "I will wait," he said. "If he comes down in the morning, I will be right here." The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Darnell sat down on the lobby sofa, set the wallet on his knee, and waited. The hours passed the way hours pass when you are tired and alone, and not sure if you are doing something noble or something foolish. The lobby clock ticked. The ice machine hummed down the hallway. A couple came in around 1:30 laughing about something and disappeared into the elevator without noticing him. The front desk woman changed shifts at 2. The new clerk, an older man with reading glasses, glanced at Darnell once, then twice, then let him be. Darnell didn't sleep. He sat upright with his hands on the wallet, watching the elevator doors like a man waiting for a verdict. At 7:15 the next morning, the elevator opened. Solomon Whitfield stepped into the lobby, wearing a charcoal pullover and dark jeans. He looked rested, calm, the kind of calm that comes with knowing every bill is paid and every need is met. He was heading toward the breakfast area when the front desk clerk nodded in Darnell's direction and said something quiet. Solomon turned and saw him. A thin young man in a wrinkled gas station vest, sitting on a hotel sofa with dark circles under his eyes and a black leather wallet resting on his knee. Solomon walked over slowly. His eyes went to the wallet first, then to Darnell's face, then back to the wallet. "How much do you want?" Solomon said. "Not thank you. Not what happened. Just how much?" Darnell blinked, confused. "Sir, I do not want anything. This is yours. You left it at the gas station last night." He held out the wallet. Solomon took it carefully, like he was handling something that might not be real. He opened it, counted the bills. $4,300. Checked the cards. All there. Checked the photograph. His thumb paused on the image. The woman in the blue dress. Mama. Easter, 1994. His hand trembled just slightly, just enough that Darnell noticed. "That photo," Darnell said gently. "She looks like she was a good woman." Solomon didn't answer. He just nodded once, jaw tight, and slid the photograph back into its pocket. Then he pulled $500 from the wallet and held it out. "For your trouble." Darnell looked at the money. 5 crisp hundreds fanned between the fingers of a man worth $9.4 billion. "I appreciate it, sir. I really do. But I did not drive here for a reward. I drove here because it was yours, not mine." Solomon's hand stayed in the air. The bills didn't move. $500 suspended between 2 men who lived in completely different universes. Nobody drives 40 miles in the middle of the night to return a wallet to a stranger, Solomon said. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it had cracked. Not anger, not gratitude. Something he didn't have a name for. "Nobody does that for free." Darnell stood up. He was shorter than Solomon by a few inches, thinner by 30 pounds. His shoes were scuffed, his vest had a coffee stain near the pocket. But he looked Solomon directly in the eyes, steady, unhurried, and said the truest thing he knew. My mama would say I did it for free. I would say I did it because it was the right thing to do. And those are the same thing where I come from. Solomon slowly lowered his hand, put the money back in his wallet, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he had absolutely nothing to say. He stood in that lobby, holding a wallet full of cash that a stranger had driven 40 miles to return in the middle of the night, a stranger who made $9.25 an hour and had refused $500 like it was nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. And Solomon knew it. He just didn't understand it yet. Solomon drove south, Memphis, his mother's grave. A small cemetery on the east side of the city where the headstones were modest and the grass was always a little too long between mowings. He brought flowers, sat on the ground beside her stone for almost an hour. Didn't say much, just sat. But for the first time in 11 years of visiting that grave, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about a gas station cashier who had looked him in the eye and meant every word he said. 2 days later, on the drive back to Chicago, Solomon did something he hadn't planned. He took the Champaign exit, pulled into the same gas station, same cracked parking lot, same half-dead neon sign. It was 10:40 at night. Darnell was behind the counter. Same vest, same textbook open on the counter, same pocket calculator. He looked up when the door chimed and recognized Solomon immediately. "Evening, sir. Back for more of our terrible coffee." Solomon almost smiled. Almost. He grabbed a cup from the machine, filled it, and instead of paying and leaving, he set the cup on the counter and stayed. "What are you studying?" he asked. First personal question he'd asked a stranger in years that wasn't attached to a deal. Darnell looked down at the book. "CPA exam prep, accounting. I am trying to get certified." Solomon sipped the coffee. It was genuinely terrible. Why accounting? Darnell was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, because he was deciding how much of it to share with a man he barely knew. "My mama came to this country from Nigeria when I was 3, Darnell said. She worked 2 jobs for 18 years, never missed a day. But nobody ever taught her how money works in America. A tax preparer in town, unlicensed, charged her $800 a year to file her returns, told her she owed money she did not owe, filed claims she never authorized. By the time I figured out what was happening, she had lost $2,800 she could not afford to lose." He said it calmly. No drama, no self-pity, just facts laid out like numbers in a ledger. And that flatness made it heavier than any tears could. "I do not want that to happen to other families like mine," Darnell continued. "Immigrant families, low-income families, people who do not know they are being taken advantage of because nobody ever showed them how the system works. In immigrant communities across America, predatory tax preparation is a $1.7 billion industry. Unlicensed preparers target families who do not speak English fluently, charging excessive fees for simple returns, and sometimes filing fraudulent claims that leave the taxpayer responsible for penalties they never earned. It is one of the quietest forms of theft in the country, and it survives because the people it hurts are the people least likely to fight back." Darnell wasn't just chasing a career. He was trying to build a shield for people who looked like his mother. Solomon finished his coffee in silence. He set the cup down, looked at the textbook, looked at the young man behind the counter, and something inside him shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like a wall developing a crack so thin you'd only notice it if you were looking. He drove back to Chicago that night without the radio on. 4 hours of silence and highway lines and his own thoughts. The voice in his head, the one that had narrated his life for 31 years, the one that whispered, "Everybody has got a price," was still there. But for the first time, it sounded unconvincing. Like a song he'd memorized so long ago, he'd forgotten to ask whether the lyrics were true. When Solomon walked into his penthouse at 2 in the morning, he didn't pour a drink. He didn't check his email. He picked up his phone, called his executive assistant, and left a voicemail. "I need you to find out everything about the CPA certification process. Requirements timeline, costs the best accounting programs in Illinois." Have it on my desk by noon." Then he hung up and stood at the window. 4,200 square feet of silence staring back at him. If this story is hitting, you take a second to subscribe for more stories like this. Now let us continue. 3 days later, a manila folder sat on Solomon's desk. Inside, it printed neatly, was everything his assistant had compiled on Darnell Okafor. Not through spying, not through surveillance, just public records. The kind of information anyone could find with a name and a zip code. What Solomon read made him set the folder down twice. Darnell owed $12,000 in medical debt. Monthly payments of $420 that ate nearly half his take-home pay before he could touch it. His mother Ngozi had been hospitalized twice in the past 18 months. Diabetic complications. No insurance. Insulin costs $340 per month. Out of pocket. Every single month. He had owned a 2009 Toyota Corolla. Sold it 8 months ago to cover a hospital bill. Bought the 2004 Honda Civic for $2,200 in cash. The car had 187,000 miles and a transmission that his mechanic said could fail without warning. Darnell had taken the CPA exam once. Failed, not for lack of knowledge. The report showed he'd scored within 4 points of passing. He'd taken the test on 3 hours of sleep after a double shift because the testing window was closing and he couldn't afford the rescheduling fee. Solomon put the folder down the second time and leaned back in his chair. The math hit him like a fist. This young man, this 26-year-old gas station cashier, making $9.25 an hour, had found a wallet with $4,300 in it, enough to cover his mother's insulin for a full year, enough to pay off a third of his medical debt, enough to register for the CPA exam, buy every resource he needed, and fix the car that might strand him on the highway any day. And instead he'd driven 40 miles in the dark, spent $22 in gas, nearly 2.5 hours of his wages, sat in a hotel lobby all night without sleeping, then looked a billionaire in the eye and turned down $500 in cash. Not because he was stupid, not because he was performing, not because he wanted something bigger, because his mother taught him that character is the only thing nobody can repossess. Solomon picked up the photograph from his desk. He'd taken it out of the wallet and placed it there the night he got home. The woman in the blue church dress, Mama, Easter, 1994. His mother, Eunice Whitfield, the woman who cleaned other people's houses 6 days a week and still sang hymns on the 7th. The woman who told him God gave us roads for a reason, baby. He wondered what she would think of the man he'd become. A man who heard the words, "Nobody does that for free," and believed them. A man who offered $500 to someone who just wanted to do the right thing because he genuinely could not comprehend that kindness might exist without a price tag. Solomon pressed his thumb against the photograph, and for the first time in 30 years his eyes filled with tears. Not grief, shame. He'd built a $9.4 billion empire on the principle that everybody could be bought. And a kid making $9.25 an hour had just disproved his entire philosophy for the cost of $22 in gas and a clean conscience. The voice in his head tried to speak. Everybody has got a price. You just have not found it yet. But this time Solomon answered it. His price was $22 and a conscience that would not bend. And it was higher than anything I have ever paid. Solomon did not go to the gas station this time. He drove to Darnell's apartment. A studio unit on the second floor of a building that smelled like laundry detergent and old carpet. He got the address from public records, parked the Mercedes across the street at 1:30 in the afternoon, walked up a stairwell with a flickering light on the landing, and knocked on the door marked 211. It took 3 knocks before the door opened. Darnell stood there, in a wrinkled t-shirt and basketball shorts, eyes half closed, hair pressed flat on one side from the pillow. He'd been asleep less than 4 hours after finishing his overnight shift. He blinked at Solomon like a man trying to decide whether he was dreaming. "Mr. Whitfield, I am not here to give you money," Solomon said. "I am here to offer you something harder to accept." Darnell stared at him, then stepped aside and let him in. The apartment was exactly what $625 a month bought in Champaign, Illinois. A futon against the wall, a hot plate on a counter no wider than a cutting board, a bathroom door that didn't latch, books stacked on the floor beside a milk crate being used as a nightstand. But it was clean, every surface wiped, every dish washed, a small rug placed neatly in front of the futon, and on the counter next to the hot plate, a framed photograph of Ngozi Okafor in a green head wrap smiling. Solomon sat on the only chair. Darnell sat on the futon. And Solomon told him the plan. Full sponsorship of the CPA exam. Every study resource, every prep course, every testing fee. Covered completely. Second, a paid internship at the accounting division of Whitfield Meridian Capital in Chicago. Real work, real pay. Real experience on a real resume. Third, health insurance for his mother through the company's employee benefits program. Full medical coverage, prescriptions included. Darnell listened without moving. His hands were flat on his knees. His eyes were locked on Solomon's face, like he was reading a contract in a language he almost understood. "There is one condition," Solomon said. "You have to pass. I am not giving you charity. I am investing in someone who proved their character when nobody was watching, but you have to earn the rest yourself. I will open the door. You walk through it on your own." The apartment was silent for a long time. Outside, a car door slammed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The refrigerator hummed its low, steady note. Why, Darnell finally asked. His voice was quiet. Not suspicious, just honest. Why me? Solomon leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped, and for the first time in 31 years, he said something that wasn't calculated. Because 30 years ago, someone could have done this for me and didn't. I was 25 years old, and I had just lost everything I'd saved to someone I trusted, and nobody reached back. Nobody offered a hand. Nobody said, "I see what you are, and I believe you are worth betting on." So I became the kind of man who believes that nobody ever would, that everybody has a price, that trust is weakness. And I carried that belief for 3 decades, like armor. But it wasn't armor, Darnell. It was a cage. And you proved me wrong. You drove 40 miles in the dark and turned down $500, and you did it because your mama taught you that character is the only thing nobody can take away. I owe it to both of us to act like that matters, because it does. Darnell's jaw tightened. He looked at the floor, then at the photograph of his mother on the counter, then back at Solomon. "Can I make a phone call?" he asked. Solomon nodded. Darnell picked up his phone, dialed, waited. His mother answered on the second ring. "Mama," Darnell said. His voice cracked on the word, just the one word. He told her everything. The sponsorship, the internship, the insurance, the man sitting in his apartment who had come back a 3rd time. Not for a wallet, not for business, just to offer a bridge. There was silence on the other end. Then a sound that Darnell had heard only a few times in his life. His mother crying, not soft crying, not quiet weeping, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it has no language. The kind that sounds like prayer and surrender and gratitude all at once. "God is counting, Darnell." Her voice broke and rebuilt itself around each word. I told you God is counting." Solomon sat in the plastic chair in that tiny apartment and listened to a mother weep through a phone speaker. And he thought about his own mother, Eunice, who cleaned houses and sang hymns, who told him God gave us roads for a reason, who would have wept the same way if she'd lived to see this moment. In America, 64% of adults who do not complete a college degree say the reason was money, not grades, not ability, not ambition, just money. The gap between who gets to become what they are capable of and who doesn't is not a gap of talent. It is a gap of access. Darnell was not lacking intelligence. He was not lacking discipline. He was lacking what most people never think about because they have always had it. A bridge. Someone willing to bet on potential instead of pedigree. Solomon stood up, shook Darnell's hand, and left the apartment without another word. Because sometimes The most powerful thing a man can do is offer something and then step back. Let the other person carry it from there. Over the next 14 months, Darnell Okafor rebuilt his life, one day at a time. His first morning at Whitfield Meridian Capital, he arrived 45 minutes early, stood outside the lobby of the 47-story tower on Michigan Avenue, and looked up at it the way a man looks at a mountain he is about to climb. He wore a white button-down shirt from a thrift store on Green Street, ironed so flat you could see the crease from across the room. His shoes were old but polished. His tie was borrowed from the morning shift guy at the gas station, who had covered for him the night everything changed. And tucked under his arm, he carried the CPA exam prep guide. 3rd edition, used, $42 from an online seller. The same book that had sat on the counter of a gas station between a cash register and a pocket calculator. The same book that had traveled with him from a fluorescent-lit night shift to a glass-walled office on the 39th floor. He was nervous. His hands shook when he introduced himself to the team, 3 senior accountants and 2 analysts who looked at him the way people look at a sentence that doesn't belong in the paragraph. Polite, careful, unconvinced. He heard the whispers within the first week. The boss's charity case, the gas station kid, Solomon's little project. He heard them and said nothing, just showed up, early, every day, studied at night, worked during the day, asked questions when he didn't understand, never asked twice about the same thing. 3 months in, Darnell was reviewing a quarterly compliance report when a number stopped him cold. A variance of $340,000 buried in a subsidiary ledger that 3 senior team members had signed off on without catching. Not fraud, just error. The kind of error that compounds over time and eventually triggers an audit nobody wants. Darnell flagged it. Not to impress anyone, not to prove a point. He sent a quiet email to the division lead with the correction and 1 line of explanation. Numbers do not lie, and I do not want anyone to get hurt by wrong numbers. The same principle that drove him to study accounting in the first place. Protect people from the damage that bad numbers do. Whether it is an immigrant mother losing $2,800 to a predatory tax preparer or a billion-dollar company carrying a hidden error in its books, the math didn't care about your net worth. It only cared about accuracy. After that, the whispers changed, not overnight, but gradually. The way respect builds when it is earned instead of demanded. Meanwhile, Ngozi Okafor saw a doctor for the first time without choosing between the appointment and a grocery run. The company insurance covered her insulin, covered her checkups, covered the blood work and the eye exams, and the diabetic foot screenings she had been skipping for years because each one cost more than she could justify. She called Darnell on a Tuesday evening while he was studying at his desk in the apartment. He'd moved by then. A 1-bedroom unit in the same building, not luxury, just space, a real bed, a real desk, a bathroom door that closed. The doctor said my levels are stable, she told him. Her voice trembled, but not from sadness. For the first time in 6 years, the doctor said, I am going to be okay. Darnell set his pencil down, closed his eyes, and breathed. Solomon was changing too, quietly, without announcement or ceremony. He started eating lunch in the employee cafeteria twice a week instead of alone in his office. He learned the names of people on his floor, not just the executives, the mailroom clerk, the night security guard, the woman who restocked the coffee station every morning at 6:15. He asked them about their families, not because anyone told him to, but because a 26-year-old cashier had reminded him that people are more than the roles they fill between 9 and 5. One evening, after a long day, Solomon picked up his phone and called Amara. She didn't answer. He knew she wouldn't, but he left a voicemail anyway. I met someone, he said. His voice was unsteady, not practiced, not polished, just raw. Someone who reminded me of the man your grandmother wanted me to be. I am trying, Amara. I am trying. That is all I can tell you. I am trying. He hung up, stared at the phone. She didn't call back that night, or the next, but Solomon left the phone on his nightstand anyway, just in case. 14 months after that afternoon in the studio apartment, Darnell sat at his desk in the one-bedroom unit laptop, open a cup of coffee going cold beside the keyboard. He refreshed his email for the 7th time that hour. The message arrived at 9:42 in the morning. Subject line, CPA examination results. He opened it. Read it once. Read it again. Read it a third time because his vision blurred and the words kept swimming. Pass. He sat there for a full minute without moving. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. Mama, I passed. The sound that came through the phone was not a word. It was something older than words. A prayer torn loose from a woman who had spent 23 years building a life on faith and sacrifice and the stubborn belief that her son would become something the world tried to tell him he couldn't be. Darnell sat at his desk, with tears running down his face, and listened to his mother praise God in Yoruba and English and the language that exists between the two, that only mothers and their children understand. Then he called Solomon. Solomon answered on the first ring. Like he'd been waiting. I passed, Darnell said. 5 seconds of silence. 5 full seconds where neither man spoke, and the line hummed between Chicago and Champaign like a wire stretched between two lives that should never have crossed. I knew you would, Solomon said finally. I knew it the night you drove 40 miles to return a wallet that could have changed your life. Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Solomon did not expect. It did change my life, sir, just not the way you think. The following week, Solomon invited Darnell to his penthouse for the first time, 4,200 square feet, overlooking Lake Michigan. Darnell stepped off the elevator into a foyer with marble floors and a painting on the wall that probably cost more than every car he'd ever owned combined. He walked through the living room slowly, the wine collection behind glass, the vintage car models on a shelf near the window, the floor-to-ceiling view of the lake, stretching blue and endless into the horizon. But Darnell wasn't looking at any of it the way Solomon expected. He wasn't impressed. He wasn't envious. He was looking at the dining table. 12 chairs, polished oak, custom-made, enough room for a family, for friends, for the kind of gatherings that fill a home with noise and warmth and spilled wine and laughter. One place setting, one plate, one glass, one fork. One napkin folded neatly at the head of the table, like a monument to a man who had everything except someone to share it with. Darnell looked at that table, and he understood Solomon Whitfield in a way no financial report or Forbes profile ever could. Solomon stood beside him. He'd seen the look. He didn't explain it away, didn't joke about it, just let the silence carry what both of them already knew. Then he changed the subject, but not really. I have a proposal, Solomon said. I want to fund a new accounting practice. Small, community-focused, serving immigrant families and low-income households, tax preparation, financial literacy, bookkeeping for small businesses. The kind of office you told me about that night in the gas station. Darnell turned to face him. You would own 70%, Solomon continued. Full operational control. Your name on the door. Your practice. Your clients, your mission. I provide the capital. You provide the expertise and the conscience. Darnell shook his head slowly. Not in refusal, in confusion. Why 70? You are putting up all the money. Solomon looked at the dining table, then back at Darnell. Because I am buying something money cannot usually buy. Proof that trust is not stupid. You are my proof, Darnell. 70% is a discount. 3 months after the office opened, Solomon's phone rang on a Sunday afternoon. He looked at the screen, stared at it for 3 full seconds before answering. Amara, hey Dad. Her voice was careful. Not cold, not warm. Just careful the way you speak to someone when you are deciding whether to let them back in. I listened to your voicemail, she said. I have listened to it a few times, actually. Solomon sat down on the edge of his bed, his chest tight, his throat tighter. Tell me about him, Dad. Tell me about the guy who made you leave a message like that. And Solomon told her. Not like a press release, not like a business case study. Like a father telling his daughter the story of how a stranger reminded him what it meant to be human. He told her about the gas station and the wallet and the 40-mile drive. About the photograph in the back pocket, about the $500 refused and the textbook on the counter and the coffee that tasted like regret. He told her about the insulin and the hospital debt and the futon and the mother who prayed on the phone, about the CPA exam and the office and the 70%. He told her everything. And it was the first time in 21 years of being her father that he'd told her a story that wasn't about him. Amara was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that Solomon would carry for the rest of his life. "You know what changed, Dad? It is not that you helped him. Lots of rich people help. They write checks and name buildings and feel good about themselves at galas. It is that you let him change you. That is what I have been waiting for. Not for you to save someone, for you to let someone save you." Solomon pressed his hand over his eyes. "I would like to meet him," Amara said. They met at the new office, a small storefront on University Avenue in Champaign. Clean, simple, a waiting area with chairs and a coffee maker and a sign on the wall that read Okafor Financial Services. Community accounting. Everyone, welcome. Darnell was organizing files at his desk when Solomon walked in with a young woman who had his eyes and her mother's smile. "Darnell," Solomon said, "this is my daughter, Amara." Darnell stood up, extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Miss Whitfield." Amara shook his hand, then held on for an extra second, looked him in the face with an expression Darnell could not quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me my dad back." Darnell blinked, confused, uncomfortable with praise he hadn't been reaching for. "I just returned a wallet, ma'am." Amara smiled, the first real smile Solomon had seen from his daughter in over a year. "No," she said. "You returned something bigger." 2 years later, Solomon drove south on Interstate 57. Same highway, same March air carrying the last breath of winter. Same trip he made every year to visit his mother's grave in Memphis. But this time, the passenger seat wasn't empty. A framed photograph sat there. The woman in the blue church dress. Mama, Easter, 1994. He'd taken it out of the wallet months ago and put it in a frame that cost $11 from a shop on Michigan Avenue. It sat on the bookshelf in his penthouse now, next to a picture of Amara at her high school graduation. But for this drive he brought it along, because his mama always did love a road trip. He almost passed the exit. Almost kept driving, but something pulled him off the highway at the same cracked ramp, into the same cracked parking lot, under the same half-dead neon sign that still buzzed and flickered like it had given up trying but couldn't quite stop. The gas station hadn't changed. Same diesel smell, same burnt coffee, same floor tiles that had surrendered to time and foot traffic years ago. The snack aisle was still half-stocked. The fluorescent lights still hummed their tuneless song. But behind the counter stood someone new, a young woman, maybe 22, braids pulled back, company vest slightly too big, and on the counter beside the register an open textbook. Not accounting this time. Nursing. Solomon smiled. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the same machine that had been brewing the same terrible coffee since the last century, walked to the register, set the cup down. The young woman rang him up. "That will be $1.89, sir." Solomon paid. Then he did something he hadn't done 2 years ago when he'd stood in this exact spot. He looked her in the eye, really looked, saw the tiredness, saw the textbook, saw the quiet ambition hiding behind a name tag and a graveyard shift. "Have a safe night," he said. The same words Darnell had said to him, the words he'd been too cold and too blind to acknowledge, the words that had bounced off his back like rain off stone. "Thank you, sir," she said. "You too." Solomon reached into his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, set it on the counter beside the coffee cup. The young woman's eyes went wide. "Sir, that is way too much for coffee." "It is not for the coffee," Solomon said. "It is for the textbook. Keep studying." He walked out before she could respond, got back in the Mercedes, pulled onto the highway, and called Darnell. It rang twice. "Your old station still has the worst coffee in Illinois," Solomon said. Darnell laughed. That sound, easy, warm, the laugh of a man who had walked through something hard and come out standing. And the best character test in the country. Solomon drove south with the window cracked. cool air on his face. Gospel station playing low on the radio. The photograph of his mother beside him. The road stretching long and straight and open ahead. He thought about Eunice Whitfield, who cleaned houses and sang hymns, and believed that roads were made for thinking. He thought about Ngozi Okafor, who crossed an ocean and worked 2 jobs and taught her son that God keeps count even when no one else is watching. He thought about Amara, who was coming home for dinner next weekend for the first time in 2 years. He thought about a dining table that now had 3 place settings instead of 1. And he thought about the voice, the old one, the one that had whispered for 31 years like gospel. Everybody has got a price, you just have not found it yet. It was quiet now, not gone. Maybe it would never be fully gone. But it was no longer the loudest thing in the room. Solomon Achebe Whitfield had spent 3 decades believing that loyalty was a fairy tale and trust was a weakness. Then a 26-year-old gas station cashier, making $9.25 an hour, drove 40 miles through the dark to prove him wrong. And the price of that lesson was nothing more than $22 in gas and a conscience that refused to be bought. The wallet Solomon dropped that night was leather and cash. What Darnell returned was something Solomon had lost decades ago and didn't know he was missing. Not money, not status, not power, just faith, just trust, just the quiet, stubborn belief that people are still capable of doing the right thing when nobody is watching and nothing is at stake except who they are. Now, before we close, a few things worth knowing. In 2019, researchers at the University of Zurich and the University of Michigan conducted a global study on honesty. They dropped over 17,000 wallets in 40 countries and tracked how many were returned. The results surprised almost everyone. Wallets with more money were actually returned more often than wallets with less. But there was a threshold. When the amount inside exceeded a week's wages for the finder, return rates dropped sharply, falling below 20% in most countries. The study suggested that self-interest doesn't disappear when the stakes are low. It disappears when the stakes are high enough to test what you actually believe. In the United States today, the median wage for a gas station cashier is $12.40 an hour. Nearly 30% of workers in that category have no health insurance. Many are students. Many are caregivers. Many are people working the shifts nobody else wants, so they can chase something better during the hours the world is awake. The CPA exam costs over $3,000 when you factor in study materials, application fees, and testing charges. For someone earning $9 an hour, that is over 300 hours of labor before taxes. The profession has one of the widest income-to-entry cost gaps of any licensed career in America. Programs exist to help, but access remains uneven, and the people who need them most are often the last to hear about them. This story is a work of fiction. The characters, the names, the events are entirely imagined, but the statistics are real. The struggles are real. And the question at the heart of this story, what would you do when no one is watching, is one worth sitting with. I wrote this story because I grew up watching my own mother work double shifts. I know what $9 an hour feels like. I know what it is like to hold something that is not yours and feel the weight of a choice nobody else will ever know about. I know the math that runs through your head at 2 a.m. when the rent is due, and the answer is sitting right there in your hands. Darnell is fiction, but the values he carries are not. They belong to every parent who taught their child that integrity is not something you perform. It is something you practice when the world is not looking. They belong to every person who ever made the harder choice, because the easier one would have cost them something no amount of money could buy back. Character is not built in the moments people see. It is built in the moments they don't. Thank you for watching. If this story moved, you take a few seconds to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. See you on the next one.